Okay, first and foremost, congratulations to both the teams for advancing to the semifinals. Call this house to order to debate about Israel. I call upon the Prime Minister to give a speech. I got excited. Okay, we'll just awkwardly wait in silence then. Back to work. Okay, now I call upon the Prime Minister to give a speech not to exceed 7 minutes. Here.
One.
Do you want to stop one?
Yes. Yeah. Shalom. In 1945, when 400,000 Palestinians were displaced from Israel, the world was silent because we recognized the Jewish people an equally compelling moral predicament. But today, Mr. Speaker, when the Jewish have a safe home for themselves, it's the Jewish right wing and their expansionary policies which are the biggest impediment to peace and the lives of hundreds and thousands of Palestinians living in that region. Our contention is simple. We're not going to say that our solution is the only solution to this problem, and we don't need to prove exclusivity. We just need to prove that this is one of the more effective ways to counter the current right-wing Israeli narrative and provide a political counterbalance within the land of Israel. We're also not going to say that we're going to force individuals to do so, but we think that if these individuals did decide to move, it would be a particularly effective way of actually doing this change in the first place. Three arguments. Firstly, why do these individuals have a principal right to do so, and why is the Jewish diaspora's identity very closely linked to the perception of Israel and how these people are treated? Secondly, why is citizenship unique in the ways these people can influence policy making? And thirdly, why is it likely to be effective given the current nature of Israeli politics, which is very fragmented? First, principles. Why is Israel different in more than just a country, right? The first reason, obviously, is given the fact that Jewish identity draws itself from being in the land of Israel, not just from biblical times, but also the creation of Israel was hinged on the fact that it was a safe home for all Jewish individuals. The fact that the rights that you get in Israel are not just contingent on geography, but the fact that you share a similar history, your ancestors share a similar predicament. That's why the right to return in Israel exists. The fact that if you're Jewish, or if your grandfather or great-grandfather was Jewish, you have the right to get full Israeli citizenship, clearly proves the point that being Israelis or Jewish are very closely interlinked. We think these individuals have a principled right, given the fact that Israel already allows them to come back, to express this Jewish identity in the way that this identity is perceived around the world and change the perception in and of itself. But secondly, we think the fact that the identity of the Jewish diaspora around the world is closely linked to the perception of the Zionist movement, right? The fact that Jews around the world, in France and in Europe and the US, and their perceptions, and the way that they're treated in society is very closely linked to the actions of their homeland, Mr. Speaker. We think it's very important for you to take ownership of your identity and ownership of the movement that people attribute to you. And we think the Zionist movement is particularly unique in that aspect as a movement attributed to individuals living in different parts of the world who may or may not support this movement. Before I go on, are there any points? Why is citizenship unique? And there are a few reasons why this is the case, right? The first is very obvious. The fact that you can vote. The fact that you can engage in form political parties or support political parties. The fact that the Israeli government and their ideologies and actions are now are influenced by the way that you think about them. The fact that the government's fate is directly tied to your opinion means that you have a greater ability to affect change by pressurizing the government. But the fact that only citizens are allowed to fund campaigns in Israel means that you can put your money to a good use and have the ability as a citizen to affect political change and support parties which aren't currently that big in trying to forward this movement. Only citizens can do this. But secondly, legitimacy in domestic discourse when you're a citizen is so much greater. The fact that other citizens are far more likely to look at you because you're Jewish and because you're Israeli. Because of the fact that you may have served the army and you may have fulfilled the similar obligations to other citizens. The fact that it's far more likely for people to buy into your ideology if you yourself are Israeli and have opted into the same framework. It's just more likely than some random white dude coming in and having a lecture when people when people within your country are pressurizing you to do so. But thirdly, your ability to influence other individuals within Israel is far greater. The first reason is very obvious, like geographic proximity. The fact that you interact with these individuals on a daily basis within your communities, in your cities and towns, as well as during political campaigns means that the exposure time is just far greater than you would get on a tourist visa, right? The second thing, the fact that you expose a perspective or a perspective which is not yet explored in Israel. If you look at Israeli textbooks, the way that the Israeli government has been brainwashing students from a very young age and only giving them the Israeli and Zionist perspective of why we should expand. Always giving them a false representation of what the conflict actually looks like, right? The diaspora and people who've studied abroad often seen a more neutral perspective of this because they've studied in actual real countries where you have neutral perspectives in history, like Europe and the US. It means that you have an ability to bring a different perspective to those who've already been politically brainwashed. We think you increase the ability of Israeli citizens who've been born in Israel to maximize their consent to the vote when they're actually exposed to other ideals and on a constant basis because you are a citizen. But we think that the government's ability to censor you reduces far greatly when you're a citizen, right? The rights that a citizen has to sue within a country or exercise certain fundamental rights are usually not accorded to foreigners, right? It's far harder for governments to suppress the voice of an Israeli citizen than a tourist whose visa they can revoke and send back to their own country. It's far harder to do it to your own citizens because other people are going to be like, that's an Israeli person, you shouldn't be doing that. Why is it going to be effective? And this is extremely important, right? Because we're not saying that this is the only way to do this, right? We think there are other influences, including diplomacy, yada, 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 which may actually pressure the Israeli government into doing this. But we think this is going to be particularly effective. The first reason is the nature and reality of Israeli politics. So the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, has 120 seats, right? There are 13 different parties which make up the 120 seats. If you look at the current ruling party, the Likud and Jewish Hope, they make up less than 35% of the Jewish parliament, meaning that votes are extremely distributed between the different parties. That's why it's going to be easy for you to form new political parties or support already existing parties because it's so fragmented. That's why even if the number of people moving in are, let's say, 500,000, their ability to affect political change will be a lot more. Yes?
Given that your Jewish diaspora is heavily Zionist in nature and the liberal Jews form a minority, how will that ever be sufficient to overturn this overarching narrative?
Okay. Firstly, that's an assumption on your side that the diaspora who've lived abroad are necessarily Zionists. We don't think that's necessarily the case. But second, that's just not true, right? But secondly, we think the fact that they've been exposed to a neutral perspective, right? It's more likely that the fact that they've studied history in a neutral perspective is going to make them a lot more progressive, right? That's just a lot more likely to happen. But secondly, let's look at the nature of the diaspora. Because even if you assume the number of people coming in aren't going to be that many, just let's look at the Jewish societies in Europe or in America. The Jewish people are usually rich upper or upper middle class people who are often progressive and have large amounts of political capital. If you look at the US, for example, the amount of money that the Jewish lobby has, or large financial institutions which are bankrolled by Jewish boards of directors on their boards, it points to you the amount of money that the Jewish individuals usually have in these societies. So the diaspora's ability to actually affect political change increases because of their access to economic resources. So even if you don't flood Israel with new Jews who are progressive, even if far fewer Jews come in, the fact that each of them is individually far more richer means that the impact is going to be a lot more. Mr. Speaker, from side proposition, it's not our contention that this will magically solve the problem or the fact that other things won't be needed. We agree that other problems, other solutions to this problem may be needed while the solution is being put into place. But we think this one is particularly effective in supplementing the solutions and ensuring a far more balanced discourse in the Israeli Knesset. We're extremely proud to propose.
Thanks, Prime Minister, for his remarks. Call upon the Leader of the Opposition to open opposition's case. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, we think Aditya's characterization of the nature of Israeli politics and the political and social political will towards the establishment of Eretz Israel is completely unrealistic. His policy is completely excessive, and his idea that some influx of progressive Jews would ultimately change this overwhelming tide is something that is delusional. This debate does revolve around numbers, especially when you're judging it on a metric of effectiveness, right? You have to show as side government that influx will necessarily overturn the sort of rhetoric that occurs within Israeli politics. But let's talk about the state of politics within Israel, right? That's the first question that we have to ask. Is it truly necessary, right? We don't think that the sort of representation he presents is really accurate. Sure, there are nationalistic sentiments within Israeli textbooks. There's a constant discussion of the Zionist movement within the social political realm. but it isn't to the extent of the establishment of Eretz Israel, right? What it requires is a return to the biblical borders way back in the past. We don't think that any nationalistic sentiment has gone to that far. Moreover, we don't think it is popular to that such of an extent. All that the Israelis want to do is maintain the current borders, maintain ownership over Palestine, maintain ownership over the Gaza Strip and West Bank. So we don't think it's really necessary at all. But let's talk about the current state of Israeli politics, and that's where this contention makes a lot more sense, right? Because whether or not there's an impending and dire need to artificially influence Israeli politics in such a pernicious manner, we say no, because in fact there has been a positive move away from the nationalist right. Why is this so, right? Because that sentiment is no longer present within the Israeli public, and that has led to a shift in the power play between the left and right-wing parties within the coalition government and the opposition. Sure, we recognize that Benjamin Netanyahu, his party, his Likud party, is generally right-wing, right? But he doesn't have full control over the Israeli parliament. He doesn't have full control over Israeli politics. In fact, he rules through a fragile coalition with centrist and left parties, right? Such as the Labour Party, right? In fact, in 2013, the elections allow for the rise of new secular parties such as Yesh Atid, which do not share the same nationalist sentiments. Given that popularity, he was forced to form a coalition with them. So there's been a move away from the far right and the sort of nationalist sentiments that existed in the past, right? But before I go on, yes.
Netanyahu's biggest ally is Naftali Bennett from the Jewish Home, who has almost the same amount of seats as the Likud party, and he's the most ultra-right-wing conservative Israel has ever seen.
Okay. Here's how a coalition party works. When you have left-wing parties in the coalition as well, that means that you will not automatically accede to a very extremist demand, right? There's always a system of compromises. Given that the establishment of Eretz Israel is the most right-wing policy that you could ever push through, we think that is a sort of concession that no left-wing party would ever make, especially within a coalition government, right? What does this all mean? The shift towards the center-left reflects a diminishing socio-political will to support extremist views such as the establishment of that particular state, and a desire to distance themselves away from that right-wing movement. Sure, it is still small, but it is growing. Therefore, we don't think it's necessary to have an influx of foreign Jews and things like that, right? Moreover, it's unrealistic because why wouldn't anyone support it? Because it requires massive land grabs far beyond what Israel can practically achieve. In addition, it also requires excessive violations of international law. So that's something that's completely unrealistic anyway, right? So we don't think that they will ever support it. But let's assume that there is an overwhelming movement for the establishment of Eretz Israel. Is it enough with their policy? We don't think that that is the case. Because if you look at the current state of the Jewish diaspora, or the Jewish diaspora throughout history, right, they are the strongest supporters of the Zionist movement. Hell, your diaspora was the reason why the Zionist movement was even created in the first place, right? And that sort of sentiment has continued through time. Tell me why I'm wrong.
On the motion assumes that these people oppose Eretz Israel. Maybe that's why.
Yeah. I'm not saying all. I'm saying most of them. There's a difference, right? So what's the consequence of this? Ultimately, the people who are opposed to Eretz Israel or who are opposed to this Zionist movement in general are in a sizable or insignificant minority. We don't think you will have that sort of massive change if you just bring in these few people anyway, and that's why their policy is ineffective. But why is it problematic, even if you bring in these few people? For a few reasons. A, that leads to massive backlash, assuming their paradigm in which everyone's in favor of Eretz Israel within the state of Israeli politics, right? Because it will be perceived by the existing Israeli voter base as an insidious attempt by the liberal West, by the liberal Jews who are not in favor, who are not aligned with us, who therefore disagree with our policies and therefore are not in favor of the Israeli state, as an attempt to diverge or to misdirect the current direction of Israeli politics. We think that sort of backlash will create a far greater effect in terms of galvanizing support for the establishment of the Eretz Israeli state. And we think that sort of backlash is particularly problematic because it's going to force out any form of discussion within the current state of Israeli society. Moreover, it's going to divert attention from other key issues. For example, like Palestine. Why? Because people in the diaspora are often most in favor of a Palestinian settlement, right? Or most in favor of infringement in terms of the Palestinian settlement. I talked about how they're heavily Zionist in nature. The problem is that even your liberal Jews, even the most liberal Jew within the United States, right, with this policy I'm in favor of, are still in favor of expanding settlements. They view this settlement as legitimate and as justified, right? And that is why the US, and US in particular, has been ineffective in promoting any sort of policy in terms of reconciliation between the Palestinians and the Israelis, right? Because of the powerful lobby groups that exist, because the vast majority of your Jewish diaspora is in favor for the infringement of the Palestinian people that exist right now. Moreover, it's going to compromise the state of Israeli politics and the kind of policies that can be presented within domestic politics, right? We don't think that your foreigners that you bring in ultimately would care about the things like, for example, the state of the Israeli economy or other particular policies like education and things like that, and are not representative of the voter base because they're just parachuted in with dual citizenship. For all these reasons, because it's a completely unrealistic policy that doesn't achieve anything, we're proud to oppose.
Thanks to the Leader of the Opposition for his remarks. Call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue government's case. Here.
We see on the side of our opposition a highly negative case, where they come out and tell us our policy is ineffective but have no alternative whatsoever. We also see constant shifting characterizations of the political climate in Israel to suit whichever point he wants to go into at each time. I have three rebuttals. Firstly, is our reaction and our policy excessive? We don't think so. Simply because we realize that the very concept of greater Israel and the way it's being articulated in local politics in Israel already show the presence of expansionist sentiments. And these sentiments are not new, nascent things that haven't come about, right? They've begun from the time of the Arab-Israeli War, and it's constantly shown in how, over the years, Israel has tried to transgress the different territories. This expansionism is therefore a serious problem that has been around for some time. We also see in Israel's continued refusal to engage in talks. We see how contentious areas, like West Bank and Gaza, have been at a standstill for the longest of times. We see in the hardliner rhetoric from the Prime Minister. We see in so many examples, right? Like how preemptive strikes have been part of their policy and way of reacting from the start of Israel's birth until now. We see how Israel continues to put in settlements in the Gaza Strip, despite the fact that it stalls talks, despite the fact that it puts any attempt at reconciliation to a standstill. We therefore realize that there is a definite problem out there. There is a problem where an attempt to create a greater Israel that will disrupt the Arab region even further is at play, and therefore there is a need to moderate the right-wing climate that is going on. And that brings me on to the second rebuttal then. Since we have asserted once and for all that there is a definite problem, do we solve the problem? They came out and told us that most of the Jewish people in the diaspora don't really oppose greater Israel. They're highly Zionist in nature. But we are not concerned that group of people, no matter how big or how small. This debate is really about the Jews in the diaspora that do oppose greater Israel, should they move back or not. So we don't appreciate the attempt to deviate from what the motion demands of them. And we realize that no matter how small this group of people who oppose greater Israel are, they do solve the problem. There's a great amount of resources that middle class and upper class people can lend to their citizenship due to all the different reasons of why citizenship confers unique benefits upon you to speak out that Aditya mentioned that was not dealt with. Things like voting, funding campaigns, articulating ideas with more legitimacy, better discourse, and how it's harder to suppress them. All these things were not dealt with or rebutted, so they still stand. Furthermore, even if there are very few diasporic Jews that come in to solve the situation, we think that a few is still better than the sort of echo chamber they want Israel to remain as. The same sort of right-wing echo chamber where there's no ability to moderate sentiments. In a few while they say to us, well, what happens if you can't overthrow the entire right-wing faction, right? Well, at the very least, we provide a substantial opposition that can moderate right-wing sentiments. We think that is better than the full right-wing runaway dominance that happens right now. Moving on to my third rebuttal then, on the backlash that is created. We see here a shifting characterization in a moment. So, Well, the issue is the current Israeli climate as extremely right-wing as you say it is. Because if you say no, as you did from the beginning, that it's not right-wing, they're all perfectly okay to work together, they're coalitions, then there's really no issue of backlash against these people coming in to air their opinions. If they then agree with us and say, yes, the climate is very excessive, then their previous case on whether there's a need for our policy or not completely false. So I challenge them once and for all to decide what they really want. Before I go on, I will take a point.
In order to achieve a sizable opposition to Arab Israel, you need a critical mass within the diaspora and bring them in. Given my characterization, how would that exist?
Alright, a critical mass comprises not only numerical strength, though we do think that you add to numerical strength no matter how small. It also includes things like the material resources you can use to fund campaigns. We don't understand why they refuse to engage with us on this issue. Furthermore, we think that given that they came out and told us, right, the right-wing coalition is in flood, and well, they're not very popular and so on. The few new citizens is precisely just what is needed to make a difference. So given their characterization, we therefore think the idea of there not being strength in numbers is enough. Furthermore, we realize that if things are really as extreme as we paint it as, and we think it is true, right, then we need every person coming, every set of resources we can get to try and sway the climate to a more moderate one, to lend new perspectives and insights to the issue of greater Israel. This then brings me on to my case proper. I'll be looking at the idea of how you lessen the impetus of and justifications of Arab militants who respond to Israeli right-wing aggression with greater brutality. Basically, how you help to stabilize the region a little more. I'm going to bring this to the original level. We realize that Jewish people in the diaspora, regardless of whether they're citizens or not, often face very negative repercussions from the capacity of right-wing Zionist politics to stabilize the largely Arab region. What I essentially say is that because Arab militants think that the Israeli state will never understand what they want, because they think there will never be any compromise, they therefore get more and more violent in their practices and refuse to move towards reconciliation. We see it, for instance, in how Arab militants target Jewish civilians regardless of their citizenship. We see it in the fact that even if you live in the diaspora but you're not a citizen, you are still affected as a Jewish person, because you often have family and loved ones in Israel that live under constant threat of airstrikes, of attacks, of militant bombings, and so on. Why do these targeted acts of violence occur? They occur from a sense of threat and the perception of Israel's uncompromising expansion into Arab territory. Before I go on, yes?
The Arabs are pissed off because the diaspora moved into Israel and started occupying. What do you think will be their response to bringing in more citizens?
Alright, if they are in the diaspora, right, they are already there. So I don't really see what the issue is. It's not as though I'm airlifting Jewish people from places outside the diaspora and bring them in. In any case, however, the right of written policy is already in place. So we don't think it's going to aggravate issues anymore. Especially new Jewish people that come into Israel help to moderate the Israeli sentiment to make things better for reconciliation with the Arab people. Moving back, right, basically, this violence happens because Arabs feel that you're not regarding their sentiments with regards to sorting out the Arab-Israeli conflict. When you do things like ignore the plight of Bedouins in the Arab region, when Israel does things like justify violence under the claim of Jewish homeland rights. And furthermore, the militants can therefore justify their acts to supporters by saying, well, look at the right-wing tyranny of Israel. That's why Arabs must be as violent and brutal as they are. We're not saying that we're going to end militancy from Arabs completely. But basically, we can now check the rise of militancy and the ability to justify terrorism by showing very clear, pointed attempts from Israel, from the Israeli people, from the Jewish in Israel, to swing back from the zero-sum politics and the zero-sum image that Israel is currently projecting. Therefore, in other words, when we bring in the more liberal Jews to try and make things a little less right-wing, a little more moderate, we think that Arab militants feel a lot less impetus to come in and do destruction and damage. For all those reasons, therefore, I'm extremely proud to propose.
Thanks to the Deputy Prime Minister for her remarks. I call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to continue opposition's case. Hear, hear.
Let's deal with the contention coming out strongly from side government on two levels. The first level, do their policy work or is it really necessary? Especially when Ruben characterized to you how in status quo the current government is already swinging to central left. And on the second issue, is there really going to be a backlash on the society, both within the individuals that choose to come in and on the political arena, something that I'll be further elaborating within my argumentation in itself. And on the last idea, something that DPM brought up, stabilizing the region by bringing in these positive and liberal Jews. Now, on the first issue, do their policy really work or is it necessary? Under this issue, they brought forth two arguments for us, right? The first argument that they brought up is the whole idea that you only need a small amount of these liberal Jews within the diaspora to enter Israel, and then this would ultimately override the overarching narrative that Ruben talked about, right? We don't think that's necessarily true, especially when Ruben POI. Therefore, any kind of sizable opposition that they really want to talk about, you need a critical amount of people willing to come in and willing to actually spread the ideas, right? The whole idea that they are against Arab Israel as a whole. But more than that, we think that liberal Jews in itself are in favor of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And we think that's very problematic in of itself, right? There is a whole idea that they really want to talk about this sizable amount of liberal Jews doesn't really exist, right? We only think that they are a small minority. But more than that, they try to argue, say, it's not really about numericals, but rather the kind of fundings they get. Ultimately, we don't think this is enough, right? Because that's based on the premise and assumption that even the Jews within Israel identify these people that come in the same as them, right? We think that's problematic, which I'm going to explain in my second issue. The second issue under this, is a policy necessary? Something they tried talking about in PM, about how there's greater number of voting that's going to occur, and the greater number of discourse, then necessarily will swing this entire government into the whole idea against Arab Israel. Now, on the issue with regards to voting, sit down. The whole issue with regards to greater number of votes and the idea of greater discussion is often based on the premise that these other Jews identify them together. The problem with is the moment these liberal Jews are against the idea of Arab Israel, especially when they have such strong biblical references, when these people congregate within the community because they see each other understanding the same biblical references. We think it's problematic because the moment people within the diaspora are against the idea of Arab Israel, the Jews within Israel won't necessarily identify them to be even Jews to begin with. That's why we think this is necessarily detrimental, right? We don't think this voting really occurs because then there'll be pressure within the society itself against these liberal Jews that actually enter the country, right? And the whole idea of discussion on the same premise, we don't think it necessarily works. But then on the issue, sit down, on the issue that, you really want, whether is there really a backlash on how this backlash necessarily occur, whether this backlash is something that occurred, that will hurt these liberal Jews that enter, and whether there's actually going to be further kind of ramifications upon the political arena, especially when Ruben characterized you why there's no longer a necessity for them to bring in the liberal Jews to. That's number one. But number two, when status quo already shows how even within the government itself, there has been an introduction of new parties that are willing to swing the entire government back to central left. Now, I'm gonna sit down, son. I'm gonna incorporate how this backlash is necessarily bad for both, firstly, the political arena, and firstly on the whole social level when you actually bring in this kind of liberal Jews in, right? And on the second issue onto how it actually regresses the kind of political changes that is already currently happening in status quo, which we think is so detrimental if we were actually to have this artificial inclusion of liberal Jews. But before I move on to explaining how it's important that we actually protect these people that go in, right? Yes?
You argue that our policy is ineffective because the number of liberal Jews are very few. And your first speaker argues that the number of Jews influx will be so large that there will be massive backlash in society. Which one is it?
So, first of all, Ruben never clarified, never said that to begin with, right? Ruben merely stated that the kind of critical amount that we are really talking about, the kind of sizable amount of Jews within this diaspora, the entire liberal Jews that they really want to bring into society is one that's few in numbers, right? We don't think they necessarily have any kind of power to come and change this kind or influence the kind of decision within the government. But more than that, especially when I explain to you how even Jews within Israel don't identify them to be the same, we think is massively harmful to the people that actually enter. But now let me quickly explain to you why on a social level, when you actually bring in liberal Jews, why is it bad for them? Because we ultimately have to understand, it's perfectly fine if liberal Jews from the diaspora sees themselves to be to have the same origins within to have the same origins within Israel. What we think is problematic here is the moment you're against the idea that bonds the community together, the idea that Eretz Israel is a God-given land, right? We think this necessarily puts you at harm because now you're simply divorced from the community within Israel in itself, right? We think the Jews within Israel do not identify these liberal Jews who are against the idea of Eretz Israel to be one of the same as them, right? We think that's why it's so detrimental, especially when they come in. Sit down, sir. We think that ultimately the problem here then is the kind of identification or mutual identification from both liberal Jews entering and from the Jews within Israel simply does not occur, right? We think this identification is important because the moment you don't identify the other to be the same as you, their whole premise for their argument about having greater social discourse, having the greater introduction of these kind of liberal ideas, and the whole idea of voting doesn't necessarily occur. Because we think there's greater harm, greater pressure from the rest of the community upon these liberal Jews, saying, why are you not supporting my cause? When this kind of Eretz Israel, the land is something that originates from the religion that we actually believe in, right? We think this is why the whole premise for Prime Minister argument doesn't really stand. But now, let's go move on as to why it regrets the current political arena, especially when Ruben spent a huge bulk of his speech explaining why status quo Israeli politics have already moved away from the kind of regress and backward-minded that they are. We think ultimately the political arena further regresses, especially when now you artificially include this kind of Jews. Then first, they don't represent the kind of people within the country when they vote, because they don't really care what's going on within the country, or they don't really have the kind of affiliation as they grow up, as they don't really live within there. Right? We think that's why on their side it regresses the whole political situation even more. We think it's also harmful for these kind of liberal Jews to enter the country.
Thanks to Deputy Leader of the Opposition for his remarks. To call upon the government representative.
Someone who has an excessive interest in Israel, that side is really disappointed in this debate. Right? I'm going to talk about 3 issues in this debate. I'm going to first clarify the current status of Israeli politics, because we think that's been muddled up in this debate and they've been mischaracterizing it. I'll also tell you why, beyond the assertions, it's a reasonable assumption to make. Secondly, I'll tell you the effectiveness of this policy and how it changes things for the better. And thirdly, we'll have a brief chat about principle, which they haven't responded to in this debate. Right, on to the first issue, the current status of Israeli politics. Like, Israeli politics has been growing right-wing by the day. The empirical evidence for that is the Likud party is a center-right party, right? And they have a coalition with the Jewish Home Party headed by Mr. Naftali Bennett, who is even more right-wing than the Likud party to start with. But you do not have to believe me on this, Mr. Speaker. The fact that settlements have only been growing exponentially, like into what they call Judean Samaria, points you to the fact that Israeli politics isn't getting any softer. It's in fact growing on a more right-wing note. So that's like good evidence for you to say that when Danny Dayan actually sanctioned more settlements after the UN admitted Palestine as an observer state. That's empirical evidence to show you that there is immense power that the right wing has in Jewish politics. But let's assume for a second that there is like a growing left wing, and that process is happening slowly. That seems like a reasonable thing to assume, especially with more and more young people. But even if that's happening, we need to do what we can to accelerate the process. And I tell you why. Because every single day we have a right wing politician in power. He builds more settlements, Mr. Speaker, and that is the biggest obstacle to peace in the Middle East. So we have to accelerate that process as much as possible to prevent there being more settlements. Like, eventually we will get to a time, not in the distant future, where a two-state solution will not be viable anymore, Mr. Speaker. That is the issue in this debate, and that is the problem that they will have to deal with. Like, it's absurd for them to say, oh, this will divert the attention from other issues, when that is the issue in this debate. The fact that settlements are the biggest obstacle to peace, and the fact that settlements are inspired by the idea of Eretz Israel. You have these lunatics who come into like debates in America with a coin that says, we have biblical evidence that Eretz Israel was reality, right? So that's the current status of Israeli politics. Let's look at the effectiveness. Before that, go.
you've conflated the issue of the establishment of Eretz Israel and settlements that ask for far greater degree. The vast majority of Jews, both within Israel and outside of Israel, are for settlements, but may not be in favor of.
The problem is settlements are a subset of Eretz Israel. So Eretz Israel, the justification for building settlements is the fact that we own this land and we are not occupying any land. Like that's precisely what we want to balance out. Like we don't think we should debate on the technicality of who believes in Eretz Israel, who believes in settlements. It's about expansionary ideals and legitimacy of expansionary goals of the Israeli government and how we balance that out. 2. Effectiveness. Nature of diaspora. Like there's this absurd assumption from side opposition that there are very few like liberal members of the Jewish diaspora. That's actually not true, right? It might be true in certain states in the United States, but certainly not in Europe, where most of the Jews do form like a liberal voting base. You can look at people like Norman Finkelstein and things, and like and organizations like Jews for Israel, who actually have lobbied their Western governments to create like positive change in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Like so, we do think there is a sizable population that will move in. But what was their next response? They told us there will be backlash, like because like there will be these people coming in and you can't live next to people who disagree with you. Like that sounds anti-Semitic on the first level, because Jews apparently can't live next to other Jews who have different opinions from themselves. That seems really weird. But more than that, like even if we presume this backlash happens, to what extent does it happen? Like you cannot put pressure on the Israeli government to stop letting people come back. The right to return is an essential part of the Israeli state and is ingrained in its constitution. So even if there is backlash, I don't see what really the problem is. And moreover, the right wing is already doing what it can, Mr. Speaker. Like backlash is not a good enough reason not to go out there and confront these people and balance those forces out. We think that's something that you should do. But the second thing they told us is divert like attention from real policies. Like the first thing that you have to identify here is this is not a policy. It's not that we're going to take 50,000 Jews and push them into Israel and everyone's going to take note. Like this is just normal people who exercise their right to return, but all for the same cause. Like it's not going to create backlash because it's a process that happens gradually where people slowly change the balance of Israeli politics. Like it's not a policy which will create immediate backlash. It's just something that evolves the political discourse within Israel, and which is why all of the arguments don't stand. But we told you particularly why even at their worst case, which assumes a very few number of people move in, it is still likely to be very effective. Like the reason why that's so is because there is not much rigidity in the Israeli parliament, right? The fact that like the ruling coalition only has about 30% of the seats mean that political fluidity is a reality in Israel. The fact that you can form new political parties and political parties are not very entrenched means that a small group of people can actually create a lot of discourse and create new political ideals. That is why it's likely to be more effective. But secondly, lobbying, right? And lobbying is not just like throwing money. It's throwing money by 50,000 or 100,000 people, all directed to the same cause. So it's not like lobbying when it works like in other scenarios. All of these people move uniquely for the purpose of changing the political discourse. So it's more likely that if 100,000 people move, all 100,000 will direct some efforts to lobbying, because that's why they moved in the first place, which is why this policy is self-regulating and ensures some amount of effectiveness. The third thing they said is, like, we told them how it changes the political narrative, because Israelis have only heard the Israeli side of the narrative. Like in debate circles, we all know the Palestinian narrative as well, but that's not necessarily true when your history books have been brainwashing you and when your media only tells you a particular strand of that narrative. The way to change it is to get more people from other parts of the world who can actually change that political reality. What did they say to this? They said, oh, like people won't interact with them, they won't like them. Like, okay, fine, let's believe that. Even if that's true, what does that mean? Like, you can still broadcast your views in the media, because as Aditya told you, you can't censor views of an Israeli citizen. It's much easier to do that to a tourist or a foreigner. So you still get your views out there, even if people don't agree with it. If it is thought-provoking enough, we think it creates much more valuable discourse, even if people don't agree with it on face value. So our policy really, even at its worst case, if you assume all their worst assertion, does create better political discourse in Israel and does create new political dimensions and new political parties which can fight for change and accelerate the process and decelerate the process of settlements and accelerate the process of peace. I'm incredibly proud of the vote.
Thanks to the government whip for his remarks. I call upon the opposition whip to conclude the constructive speeches. Hear, hear.
Yeah.
two issues that I'm going to be looking at in today's debate, right? The first issue on whether the bringing in of this citizenship really helped the status quo, and secondly, on whether this influx of this Jewish diaspora, whether it's going to necessarily help or harm the communities themselves, and whether it is necessarily the right thing to do. Now let's go to the first issue, right? On whether bringing the these people to become citizens really going to help status quo, really going to change things within politics. Okay, we're going to break down government's argument step by step, right? What they said from the start till the end. Okay, their first line of argumentation, they came out, it was because they told us of the uniqueness of citizenship, because they told us that these people are able to vote and they can use their money and lobbying power. But while we don't completely disagree, right? We think that this is not a very sizable majority and it's not strong enough to overturn the complete politics of Israel, right? Because as Ruben already told you in the first place, right, this politics, even though it really has been majority right-wing for very, very long, it has been slowly changing, and we think that it's evolving, and you should let it evolve by nature, by itself, and should let it evolve organically instead of bringing new citizens who may or may not have a very strong say in the government. Because, and then their response to that was just like they said no, these people are still going to be seen as Jewish, are going to be seen within the Jewish community. They'll still have influence, and they said that these people have a very strong connection to Israel. Yes, but then again, right, our response to this is that Farhan already told you, right, that these people would not necessarily be seen as true Jews, right? Because the very nature of Eretz Israel, right, is that many Jews believe that it was God-given, and many of these Jews their life is based on the premise of religion, and they base the issue of Eretz Israel based on biblical interpretations, right? What happens when you bring the diaspora who oppose this, right? They will feel that these people do not agree with them on a basic and fundamental level, which is what they have been fighting for all their life, right? Because it is their life's work to ensure that Eretz Israel is part of their colony. No, thank you. And we think that when these people come in, they are not going to necessarily accept it. Sure, we think that they're still able to live with them, tolerate them. That is not a problem here. But their influence on the government is going to be, it's going to be very minimum at best, right? Because even if like they try to hastily tell us towards the end of the second speaker's speech that discourse is going to happen, but it's not going to happen, right? Even though you don't restrict views in the Israeli government, right? Their views are not going to get very much attention because the majority dominated view is that Eretz Israel should exist. Yes.
You believe and you claim that the majority of Israeli population is left-wing and left-leaning. Then why is that any backlash for people who oppose it?
No, we're not saying that the majority left-wing, right? We're just saying that it's moving towards the center, right? And we are, and okay, I'll respond to that more clearly, right? Because this is what their third type of argumentation was about on this issue, right? They told us about how it is still going to be right. Israel is still dominantly right-wing, and that this thing needs to change, and the only way to change is have this diaspora of coming. We don't agree with that on two counts, right? Because we think that ultimately, right? Ruben has already provided you the characterization of how these right-wing Jews by President Netanyahu have actually agreed to a coalition with the left-wing people. And Netanyahu was the first Israeli prime minister to recognize the possibility that Palestine might have its own independent state. So we can see that their views are slowly changing. Even though they may have been right-wing in the past, they are willing to accept alternative viewpoints, and we think that the direction that they're going in is changing. We don't need an artificial influx of Jews to change the system. No, thank you. Their fourth line of argumentation that was coming up was the idea that because we told them that we are talking about the minority who oppose, right? Because we say that even though there are people who oppose, even though they go in, right, they're very minority part of the Jewish diaspora and not really going to cause much change, right? The thing is that this debate is about whether this group of opposing Jews who are in the minority can cause some kind of change. But we say that they're not going to cause some kind of change simply because they are a minority, and even though they may have entered the citizenship, even though they may be in some place of political power in the new Israel, right? We don't think that their views are going to get very much like within the party. Now, the last idea that they brought up towards this issue was they're telling us that they told us that we're going to be able to stabilize the region because now, when you have these Jews who oppose the Eretz Israel, you're going to be able to mend relations with the Arabs, right? But this is where Ruben's POI came, right? And they didn't fully respond to that. He said, what happened? The Arabs have been angry since in the first place because Israel have been occupying territories, right? So what exactly is the reaction going to be when more Jewish Israelis come into Israel and say that they're going to actually help them and they actually oppose like the creation of Eretz Israel, right? And even if we take the idea that they're going to cause some change, right? We think that the vast majority of Jews, right, even though they oppose Eretz Israel, right, some of them may still disagree with like the land claim, the land claim of like Palestine, right? So we don't really think it's going to be, we don't really think they're going to effect much change. We don't really think they're going to be very moderate, and we don't think they're going to improve relations with the Arabs. Now let me move on to my second issue, right? Before I go on, any POIs?
So on one hand, you're claiming that a large majority of the population in Israel is already comfortable with people who don't oppose Eretz Israel. So why is this suddenly a backlash and exclusion of individuals who now come in?
No, we're not saying that the majority are necessarily comfortable with people who oppose Eretz Israel, which is why I told you that when these people who oppose the Jewish diaspora from other countries who oppose come in, that their views are not going to get much light, right? Because I told you that these people, the local Jews, right, don't necessarily agree with them, and even though the problem is that the majority want the creation of Eretz Israel, but we don't think that it's very legitimate. Let's move on to the second issue, right? And their argument here was that they're telling us that they told us that these Israelis should be allowed to return to their homeland because the right to return is there. I mean, they told us that there's not going to be a lot of backlash. But we disagree with this, right? Because we have two responses. Because the first reason is that they didn't necessarily show, right, why the diaspora would choose to take up the citizenship, right? And the only narration coming from this along this line of argumentation, but they have some connection to Israel and they have the right to return. Sure, but even if they do, even if they choose to take up citizenship, right? What exactly is their impact going to be, and whether is it really going to be a very, very strong impact? This is something that Ruben and Farhan raised, but they didn't really respond to it. They dropped it. And our second response is that Jewish Israelis, right, are still going to live with them, right? We're not saying that they're completely going to disregard these people who come in, but ultimately we are saying that they're not going to have much influence within the political party because these people have not lived in Israel for very long periods of time. We think that it's not a very fair judgment to make. So ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, please go with my side of the house.
Thanks to the opposition whip, that concludes the constructive speeches. Moving on to replies, I call upon the op reply speaker. What? Oh, my bad. Yeah, we're good.
Mr. Speaker, the reason why side government failed is because they misconstrued our case because of their inability to be in touch with the Israeli sentiment. We had to establish the reality of the situation. And the reason why government loses is because they were extremely myopic and failed to deal with the characterization that we defended throughout three speakers. We, on the other hand, not only defended our characterization, but also engaged with them on their characterization and presented harms under their reality. Right? That first, we showed you that there is a dire need to implement this policy and that we won't be able to import enough people to redirect the nationalistic power. And secondly, the shift towards the left has already been happening and bringing Jews from the diaspora, which by the way means foreign Jews who are not Israelis, okay, is not only going to stunt this advancement, but also cause the active regression of it. So let's talk about the impetus for this policy. Will the establishment or will the idea of the establishment of Eretz Israel gain enough traction within the societal consciousness to eventually become a reality? That's something they needed to defend, right? Gulf's stance was a bit unrealistic, that everyone's brainwashed to accept this concept through the state media, national policies, even history textbooks. We think there was a conflation between the establishment of the state of Eretz Israel and settlements. We think one is a subset of the other, but that doesn't mean you go for both, right? So who exactly supports that, right? We think that just because you support settlements, which is what's being discussed right now in Israel, right? And that's what's being proposed or promoted. It doesn't mean that there's that sort of pernicious or insidious desire to promote the establishment of Eretz Israel, because it means a return to biblical era borders. So it's not just about settlements, it's going further than that. And we think that extension is not very popular. We've explained this through our characterization, that there has been a rise of center-left, or of the center-left within Israeli politics. Why? Because it gained traction amongst the Israeli youth. They just put it away and say, oh, it's insufficient. But here's the problem with that response, right? A, they did concede that it is a game of numbers, that if you have a small amount of the center-left, that it is a game of numbers to reverse the sort of national trend. And they never explain why it's insufficient in this particular scenario, given that they accepted that there might be a small number of Jews that they can bring in. Why is it insufficient under our paradigm when it's local Jews as opposed to foreign Jews? A nuance that was completely missed out by side government. Moreover, we brought to you the characterization of the Jewish diaspora. We told you that the vast majority is heavily Zionist, and truly liberal Jews are few and far between. So, as a consequence of that, we argued that the impact is minimal. Furthermore, even amongst liberal Jews, they still support the establishment of Palestinian settlements, and that's a harm that they never contended with. That you will never gain the traction to stop Palestinian settlements if you are bringing in more like-minded Jews that think of the same exact policies, right? Moreover, we argued, we took them at their best case, right? We showed you that there will be a clear backlash, assuming that the narrative is that strong, everyone's in favor of it. There will be an overwhelming perception that the national politics are about to be hijacked by foreign Jews, right? There will be a disconnect given that this is the support. And that is the sort of backlash that we want to prevent, because it's going to galvanize the far right. And we think that's a problem because ultimately it will result in the ineffectiveness of their policy. Moreover, you're going to empower the establishment of additional settlements and possibly going even further than that. Because we presented very clear harms as to why their policy shouldn't run, and even then, we showed you why it's unrealistic under any scenario. We are very proud to oppose.
Thanks to the opposition reply speaker, I call upon the government reply speech to conclude the debate proper. You're here.
Okay guys, you can't lie about an issue as big as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and Israeli politics and hope that flies in a debate. And it really doesn't help when your lies are inconsistent with the negative case you were trying to run. I have 3 things to cover today. It's a shame that my points are labeled as such. Firstly, is Greater Israel really a problem? Secondly, why their points still fall under the very strange characterization of an Israeli government swinging towards the center? And thirdly, why their points still fall under our truthful characterization of a right-wing government in Israel? So firstly, is Greater Israel a problem? Because despite the fact that the motion talks about trying to balance views about Greater Israel, they refuse to emanate to at least 2 different speakers. We tell yes, right? It's because both sides agree that there's a God-given justification on the part of the Zionists towards expansionism. That is why this is a problem. We also give concrete examples on how wrangles over disputed territory that Israel wants to expand to keep happening. One has happened about a month or so ago. They don't dispute all these examples, and therefore that really is a problem. But if it's not a big problem as they claim, right? 1, that doesn't mean it's not a problem to debate about. Number 2, if it's really not a big problem, I don't see why they're so concerned about backlash. We do see a shift at the end of the debate where they really agree with us that there is a problem of a Greater Israel. The only issue is that they think local Jews are going to do it so much better in Israel. So the metric is therefore who best solves the problem. Now let's go on to my second point, on the lie about a government swinging to the center. What is really sad, right? So the lie about a center-aligned government, where you don't even know what being center-aligned means. What does being inclined towards the center means? It means that I don't want to invade territories that people don't think are my own. It means that I don't want to expand into Greater Israel and where Arabs live and still claim it is a home for Jewish people. That is what it means to be center-aligned. So this is the whole idea that they say, right? That we don't have enough Jewish people in the diaspora to make a difference. Even so, if the government is already swinging towards the center or the left, then a small number of newly minted liberal Jewish citizens will be able to swing this tenuous and fragile balance. Furthermore, under this characterization, this whole idea of backlash they brought forth never applies, simply because there is a greater receptiveness to the new ideas that we claim that Jewish people from outside are going to bring into Israel. So our policy under their characterization completely stands, completely works. So in other words, right, the attempt to have your cake and eat it with regards to characterization of Israel basically means that your points completely combust. But let's go on to the third point, on our characterization of a right-wing Israel. And we think that makes sense to talk about it as being right-wing, right? Not only because all the facts that the average reasonable person will know, talks about Palestinian suffering and encroachment and conflicts, not only that, but because the debate is really about how Jewish people who oppose better Israel will have to balance domestic politics, therefore showing inclination towards the right in Israel right now. Other than that, their point about there not being enough Jewish people to come in and moderate politics still doesn't fly. Simply because the very nature of democracy means citizenship always makes a difference. The very idea of power to the people means diverse voices, no matter how small, goes a very long way. But even if it doesn't, right, the failure to rebut Aditya's entire PM speech means that at least we make some difference in moderating politics. Because citizenship does that much. We don't see how they do any better with just local Jewish people. But not on backlash, right? We already told you that it's a fundamental Jewish identity that is very much tied in to the biblical narrative of Israel, the geographical site, and also your social and spiritual identity. Because its fundamental identity is not rebutted, we therefore think it's pure legitimacy and will not face backlash. Also, in my case, I mentioned to you, the fact that you are affected by Jewish and Israeli politics, even when not a citizen, also means that you have to play a part. That was also dropped. But anyway, right, what is wrong with having different political views if you are all Jewish and you all enjoy the right to return from the very beginning? So this whole backlash point doesn't make sense. So let me sum up in this last 10 seconds, right? What have they told you? Honestly, I don't know. I don't think they've even made up their minds about whether they want to debate about greater Israel and Israeli politics or not. But we have told you about the right to return, about the responsibility to return, and how you can make a difference in the political climate for resources and your votes. For all those reasons, therefore, I'm extremely proud to propose.
Thanks, Bianca. That concludes the debate. Class before shake hands will announce the decision in LT 19A.